Hi, welcome to episode 46 of Startups Right. Today, my guest is Emily Aronin. She is the investor at the Venture Collective. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Great to have you on. And we have a lot of questions, a lot of things to discuss. But I guess before we start the episode, I would like to hear more about yourself in your own words. So, stage is yours.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you again for having me. Great to chat. It's been great getting to know you through the process of prepping for this episode. A little bit about me, and I'll make it quick to not bore the audience. I actually started in the biotech world. Actually had a pretty long history of internships through a young age. Just very interested in the healthcare space, and so had an internship starting at a big pharmaceutical company called Astellas Pharmaceuticals, where I learned, the pros and cons of lots of infrastructure, and knew that being at a big firm, wasn't at that stage where I wanted to be. And so, ended up at another spot called Matter, where I really focused on the opposite of what these big pharmaceutical companies do. And this was a healthcare incubator. And so I had the privilege of working with so many young startups. And that's where I really started to love the early stage stuff. I built a passion around working within an ecosystem and people who are really pursuing their dreams, at any cost. And so recently, right after that, I ended up at another incubator where I came along a company called Evozyne that was doing data-driven molecular engineering. And, at that point in time, it was brand new. I mean, AI, ChatGPT hadn't really kicked off, and it was really redefining what the era of medicine was going to look like for the next 10 years. And so jumped aboard and joined them for a handful of years while I was in college, actually, and had the privilege of working with one of the most amazing teams I've ever worked with on, initially figuring out what we even do with a technology of the sort, and starting at the root of the problem of what we see in drug design and development, and working backwards from there on how we can scale. And since then, the company has grown immensely, had a few amazing partnerships, but I ultimately left after they raised their Series A round to join Valor Equity Partners, a great growth equity firm based in Chicago, New York, almost global at this point. And I worked on seed Series A investing out of a fund called Valor Siren Ventures and got to work under a mentor of mine, John Shulkin. Over there, I focused on food, retail, sustainability, alongside these amazing strategics, Target, Nestle, Gordon Food Service, and had a fantastic experience. Really started to build my love for investing more broadly. But when they decided to launch a seed fund, jumped over, actually moved to New York to really focus on the early stage of investing, and did that for a couple months before realizing that was, what I wanted to spend 100% of my time on. And so joined a firm actually about 6 months ago today, and I got the privilege of working with three fantastic GPs. And we focus on two buckets of investing, which I'm sure we'll get into more, but very quickly at a high level, we focus on one bucket being industrial transformation, which is how we can leverage technologies to transform legacy businesses and industries that haven't seen adoption in many, many years. And then the other bucket, of course, tying to my past, is healthcare. And we'll do anything from software services all the way to biotech. And so happy to chat more about that, but I know we have a lot to get through today.
Fair enough. First of all, congratulations on your 6 months anniversary
Thank
with your firm. One thing I'm just curious about, because you experience kind of both sides of the aisle, and you also worked in the, as you said, commercial development too, as a startup, and now in the venture space. What's kind of tying all this together?
Yeah, a great question. And as you know, took a little bit of an abnormal path into venture capital, but one I'm very grateful for each and every chapter. For me, the through line has always been translation, taking innovation and making it usable in the real world. And so in biotech, what that looks like is bridging innovation from the lab and the clinic and navigating regulatory approvals, clinical trials, patient access, et cetera. And as you heard at Evozyne, it was really starting at that grassroots problem and understand how we can make this technology as valuable as possible. now in venture, it's about finding, founders who can cross that same bridge, both in healthcare, but also in industrial transformation. Love founders who are, not just building elegant and cool technology, pushing the boundaries, but who really understand the messy realities of the industries that they're in. And so, these are industries where workflows haven't changed in decades. Infrastructure is entrenched, adoption hurdles are high. And that combination, deep technical expertise and operational insight is really like what I look to back in a founder. And, in my opinion, the real leverage in a lot of these sectors comes from not the innovation alone, but integrating into these really tough to integrate with businesses. And, I'll actually give a big shout out to my father, who's, my mentor and idol, who taught me from a very, very young age that you invest in application. You see so much cool science on a day-to-day basis, and especially being an early stage tech investor in New York City. I mean, you see a whole new world of how we can apply AI and science, etc. And it's such a privilege, but it also means staying disciplined in the way we invest and passing on the coolest humanoid technology that I want in my house, because a lawnmower can make a bigger difference.
I kind of can guess why you're drawn to the early stage investing, right? Like the passion you have for technology and science and innovation is really visible. So I can understand it. But I still want to ask because, a lot of people also switch to gross investing, right? Gross equity, especially, financial compensation wise tends to do better. So people are more drawn in that direction. What, since you experienced both of them, right? That you worked at the gross equity firms and you kind of ended up focusing more on early stage investing. What really appealed and was attractive to you in terms of early stage investing, and why the venture collective, right?
Yeah, I mean, a few reasons. I will say at the ground root, my career has really been defined by a few people who believed in me and supported me when I definitely shouldn't have been, believed in. When, people shouldn't have taken a chance on the 18-year-old in college to join their startup, which is their life's work. And, a handful of people really did that for me. And I wanted to be that person for someone else. I wanted to be able to take the risky chance on someone that I really shouldn't. And my boss and I actually always talk about this, what really compels us to back the founders we do. And, in addition to the very lengthy diligence we do, it's really this idea of getting someone behind you and getting a crowd to follow you when you really shouldn't, right? And I think that's such a special thing about venture is you get to back those people at a time where, they have no revenue. They're working out of their parents' basement, but you see something in them. And that's so special. And it ties to so many pieces of my story as well. And so the ability to start passing that on is such a privilege. And I will also say the venture collective, allows me to do that, but also founders who are backing spaces that are, not just smaller, SaaS businesses, but redefining like the way we eat, agriculture, the way we build, construction, these things that we see so often in our day-to-day life, but never really think about. And that feels very special. And, my philosophy in investing is, as I'll consistently say throughout this podcast, is I'm less focused on whether the tech is bleeding edge or incremental, or it's can this technology be adopted at scale? And is this something that will change the lives of so many people? And, the best founders are the ones that deeply understand their customers' reality.
You already mentioned founders, so it's a nice segue to our next question. How do you think about uncovering opportunities in sectors that are often overlooked, as you just mentioned? And what do you look for in founders tackling these hard problems?
Yeah. So the counterintuitive thing about overlooked sectors is they're often hiding in plain sight. Everyone knows agriculture is huge. Everyone knows, manufacturing is critical, especially now that it's been in the limelight. But they're often overlooked by venture because they require a different kind of pattern recognition. Most VCs are trained to spot exponential growth curves, viral adoption. I actually heard, I believe it was someone from General Catalyst say, the triple, triple, double, double is out. We are much quicker growth. And to me, if you are approaching investing from that perspective, while it is going to find you winners in so many sectors, in the sectors that I invest in, value creation looks more like compound interest than exponential growth, which is, a very scary thing for a lot of investors. And, bringing a lot of these companies to IC takes a different craft. But I actually look for founders who have something that I describe often as productive impatience. And, they're frustrated by how slow an industry moves, but they also understand why it moves the way they do. And they've lived through the regulatory cycles. They know where the people you need to reach are. And they understand that the procurement process takes 18 months for good reasons, right? And that combination of insider knowledge and outsider urgency is what I really seek for. And a lot of people miss, again, by looking for these exponential growth curves in industries that, are still on pen and paper. And, getting them to use your AI solution isn't going to happen overnight. And, the most nuanced part of this is that the founders in these spaces aren't really looking to disrupt everything at once. They're finding the places and the niches in these industries where, they're kind of ready to change, right? The old guy behind the desk is saying, I wonder what would happen if I didn't have to go to every single machine one at a time every single morning to click on. They see it, but it's often driven by external forces and regulation or labor shortages or supply chain vulnerabilities, and they design their solution around that. That is the root. They don't design their solution around technology. It's really about, that guy who they're targeting as their first customer. What is his biggest pain point every day? And, the hardest problems, in our opinion, requires the most patient capital available, because once you can prove you can solve them, you're up for a very, very long journey of truly integrating. And, it takes someone who understands their language, their constraints, and, and their timeline.
Mm. Is a typical founder archetype in the space you're talking about are usually people who've been working in the space for over 20 years, who are really know this industry inside out, and then they end up building, or they can be outsiders, some young person too?
Yeah, it's a good question. And as an early stage investor, I've learned not to put no's or yeses on anything, right? Because
Mhm.
you see so many opportunities, and I'm always open to be proven wrong. Is the language we use at our firm. And so I won't say there's one founder I look for, but I will say the founders that I'm really geared and excited about are the ones who have lived the problem.
Mhm.
And they base their solution off of what they've experienced, and they understand the chain of command. They understand what it was like for these people. And, these are often not the San Francisco, 16-year-old founder who's, probably one of the best computer scientists in the
Yeah.
world. It's often, the man who's sitting in the police force, and
Mhm.
he was on the ground for 15 years.
Mhm.
And he recognized both the problem, but what it takes to solve it. And so when I'm seeking out a founder, I'm looking for someone who is grassroots, boots on the ground, living what they're looking to solve.
So having a strong founder market fit is extremely important to you. Is what I.
Yeah. And look, there's a lot of words that people use: founder market fit, domain expertise. Um, but something that's interesting is I like to understand how many minutes in my 30-minute initial calls they spend talking about the problem versus the
Mhm.
built. And it's a very quick insight to tell you, you might have domain knowledge, but are you basing your solution around it? And so I love the founders who I get on the phone with, and they can't stop talking about the challenge that they faced when they were in the field. And they talk about that more time when they talk about what they're building. I mean, those are typically the founders. And again, always open to be proven wrong, but typically the founders who are on the right track.
Another very quick follow-up question I want to ask. You in software, you see pivots a lot, right? This young founders, they come up with an idea, they're like, okay, eventually this doesn't really work, so they pivot in a different direction, and it ends up working out or not, right? But this kind of industries are very, they require a lot of capital investment, and also, the scale is pretty big. What's your kind of feeling about? Sure, let's say the person understands the problem really well, but in terms of solutions, what's your thoughts and feelings about pivoting in this kind of spaces?
Yeah, I think you're hitting on a really big point and a really big reason why people have recently moved away from hardware, large CapEx investments into spaces that, they're not really sure about, because the capital you put towards the solution, can only take you so far. And you don't really have room to pivot. And that's why this founder archetype that I've laid out for you is so immensely important, right? Like, you don't have room to, after you've built out your facility, realize it's better being in Mexico than it
Yeah.
is in California. You don't have the room to do that. And, you also don't have the distribution channels that can gear towards flexibility. And so you pitch the John Deere of the world once, right? And you only have a few chances to make that work. And so, it's the exact reason, again, why people have really leaned away from hardware investing.
But as we were saying, there's a strong revival of manufacturing around the world, especially in the U.S. Right? There's a sort of like an industrial transformation happening, and I feel like for outsiders, that term might not really mean much. It might sound abstract. So, could you just give us an explanation and summary of what that means in this era?
Yeah. So at its baseline level, it's the modernization of industries, where the biggest challenge isn't technology, it's integration. And agriculture, mining, manufacturing, these have gotten a very bad rap for not being invested in because they're boring. They're unsexy. I hear that word so much, unsexy, right? I see it every day, but it's not interesting. That's why no one's targeting it. I actually think people aren't investing because these are hard problems to solve. You cannot, wake up one day and decide to solve what is an entrenched, massively large challenge to solve. You're dealing with infrastructure that's existed for decades, workflows that are deeply entrenched, and honestly risk averse operators most of the time, who care about uptime, safety, efficiency over early adoption. A lot of these folks already run EBITDA positive, and you go to them and sell your solution and say, we have a 2-year payback period. They're like, I got to pay my operators. This is how we've run. We don't have venture capital dollars to fund our farm over the period of burn. And so, that's really how I think about industrial transformation. It's, these industries that make up the backbone of the economy. It represents a $12 trillion market. Just like sit with that first. $12 trillion, and employs over 100 million workers in the US. But productivity in these industries is low. We're seeing a lot of crises where, software and services and tech, like you were saying, like they've seen a 28% increase in productivity over the past few years. The essential economy, all these businesses that I'm talking about within industrials, has declined 1.7%. Gone down. Our economy is growing. These industries' productivity has gone down, and that's costing our economy $5,000 per worker annually, and costing the US 10% of its potential GDP. I mean, the size of these problems is so enormous. And, this is what I define as industrial transformation, a place where we need to solve an integration problem, redesign workflows, train teams, meet compliance requirements, the hard, the messy, the slow challenges in our space.
You already mentioned a couple of reasons, but I'm genuinely curious, like why it's been so hard to modernize. not only modernize, but also see decline.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to generalize for a lot of these spaces because we've seen this challenge time and time again, and what we bucket into industrial transformation. Um, but I like to use healthcare as an example because I think it's very profound, and not often bucket into industrial transformation because how much capital is poured into it. But I was actually in Miami, and I had the pleasure of chatting with someone who sits on the board of like a Miami hospital system. And so this is someone who's as close to the problem as you get. And I was asking him, what are you seeing, right? Everyone is coming out with AI. Um, what's going on? And what he had to say was, you know, we need to improve uptime in these rooms. We need just a simple recording software that can help take notes and support doctors and nurses. And I was appalled because if I had a nickel for every time a founder pitched me a solution that was doing exactly what he said, I mean, I wouldn't even need to be in VC because everyone is building, but no one understands what it really means to get a solution up to the board and do something that really works with these industries. And you know, I would love to have a year to just sit down and understand, what these workflows look like. But this is why it takes such a nuanced founder, someone who's lived in it, because there's workflows, there's integration. You've a subset of nurses you have to train, right? Like these aren't there's no app store for these areas. And then on top of that, you have highly regulated spaces for good reason. But that also means you're working around that. And so, I could pinpoint each and every industry and why they're slow. But what we're seeing more broadly is just industries that have built decades and decades of infrastructure on top of different solutions, and you got to work within that.
Mhm. So, just to recap for myself, I guess the main takeaway for me is not the lack of technology; it's the integration into workflows into the system is tends to be the main problem. Is that would be a valid summary?
Yeah, yeah, and it's integration with systems that have, infrastructure that have lived there for so long. And
Mm.
so going and winding out each and every component of infrastructure is, I don't want to say impossible, but a very difficult problem to solve. And so we have to find people who are willing to work within the guardrails that exist within these industries.
I'm sure you've either invested in or you're aware of certain companies that are doing a very good job with this stuff, right? Can you give us an example and also tell us why they're doing such a good job?
Yeah, yeah, and it's a fantastic question and something I love talking about because we recently invested in a company called Mock, and not the Mock Industries, Mock.io. Um, that would also be very cool. But this is led by a founder I admire. His name is Colin Hurd, and he's not your typical young founder entering the tech world. He's from Iowa, and he lives this problem, has lived this problem from childhood. He built one of the first autonomous agriculture vehicle companies, sold it, saw it acquired by a big company. And through that experience, he realized mid-size OEMs, small to mid-size OEMs, are being completely underserved. Big players like John Deere are consolidating solutions, but there is no solution built for the thousands of smaller manufacturers who are critical to these players. And so through living that problem, both on his farm and then also by building, he realized, what a big challenge in front of him and how he can solve it. And so he, alongside a fantastic growth equity firm, bought out two solutions and with lots of research and lots of backing behind them, and built this horizontally integrated solution. And a lot of people are going to think we're crazy because that is very against the standard of what we're seeing with autonomy right now, with all these players with lots of funding. building more vertically integrated solutions. And I won't say that vertically integrated, isn't the way to go in some spaces, but I will say that in this space, we bought into his vision that he lived through of horizontal integration. Um, you know, and I think that's a really interesting perspective that he brought, because you ask myself why, right? Like, technology itself is built for vertical integration, right? The more specific you can get, the more data you can collect, the more edge cases, the better you can perform, right? That's how technology works. But when we zoom out and look at how the industry works from the perspective of someone who's lived it, we realize that what most of these autonomous off-road vehicle solutions are doing is driving from point A to point B, right? And you don't need to be industry specific to do that. What you need is to be operator specific. And what I mean by operator specific is I can go to every farmer, right? Someone making grain, take their tractor and equip it with autonomous technology and have it run today. What you will see when you start working with these farmers is farmer A wants a sharp turn around the corner. Farmer B needs you to avoid this tree because this tree has been in our family for 15 years. You gotta go around it. Don't ruin my land over there. It's a precious tree. What you see is each and every, and this is just a broad example, but each and every operator has their own specific needs. And so he's realized you can build a horizontal solution. You just have to be patient with how you're integrated within each and every operator. And this has already paid off. I mean, we just invested. They are already partnered with over 30 OEMs across various industries. I mean, that's remarkable for this stage. I mean, go ask a lot of these vertical integrated solutions how many partners they're with, and then, how many vehicles and hours logged they actually have in the field today. I can bet you Mach is, far ahead of the curve in most of the cases. And, the global off-highway equipment market, including agriculture, construction, defense, everything, it represents $100 billion opportunity. I mean, these are numbers we don't hear very often. And he has just built a fantastic solution. And to tie it all back together, it's, this is a true example of what I'm talking about, where you have to live the problem and you have to approach your problem from the perspective of the customers you're serving.
Got it. Very, very cool. Just to clarify for myself, so the solution itself is essentially gain like autonomous vehicle.
Yes. Yeah. And so a little bit about the solution. So they have built a platform with proprietary long-range machine mesh networking that enables communication across rugged, infrastructure-poor environments, a modular navigation stack that adapts to like very diverse job types, and then a situational awareness system that uses machine vision and sensors powered by Edge AI.
Mhm.
And so this enables them to run any vehicle. If they're working in defense right now, they're working in agriculture, any off-road heavy machine autonomously. And, they can even achieve a 1 to 20 operator right now. So, operator really only intervening where really needs to intervene. And, they've achieved roughly 80% commonality across deployments and only 20% customization. And that customization is focused on environment and operator specific situations.
Wow, that's really cool. I have two follow-up questions about
Yeah.
that. One is, do you think we'll always need a human in the loop uh, technologies, or do you think there's going to be a point where we just fully rely on AI without the need for an operator, for example?
Yeah. I mean, I think we're already seeing it.
Mm.
I actually think it's crazy that we have started with on-road, right?
Mhm.
Like, the Mobileye technology is completely autonomous.
Mhm.
I mean, who decided that the best place to use autonomous technology for the first time in our history was with humans?
It's human.
I mean, you mess up on the the fields, which, of course, this is detrimental to our customers. And so
Yeah.
this is something very, very seriously, but it is a lot less detrimental than
Mm.
what you see if a car accidentally crashes or hits something it's not supposed to. And so I think we're already seeing this, but I think, we're going to see it get better and better over time to where we can really trust it. I mean,
Mhm.
I drove in a Tesla yesterday from, the burbs to the city. I was eyes on the road, of course, as the Tesla requires, but I was amazed at how good the technology already is. And, um, there's an interesting chart that I'm happy to share with you after the fact, which shows how we can train autonomous technologies. And it's an interesting line that shows how often we see regular situations. And this happens very quickly. We can train on, the situations we see every day very quickly. Edge cases, those take so long to train on, but we're already doing it. And so, I think in a world where we can start to collect more data and start to get these vehicles deployed, we can absolutely see a world where we won't need an operator in the loop.
That's really cool. And in terms of the solution you mentioned, look, I like it sounded like a very complicated technology, at least from the way you described, right? Like, is there multiple components and etc. And obviously, the person you said building it is very much been in the space for a while. They have experience. When you evaluate an idea like that, right? As somebody, I mean, as an investor, you get to see technologists from so many different sectors, from so many different tech backgrounds, and etc. Obviously, you're not going to be an expert in everything, right? How do you like look at an idea that might be quite complicated, and you're like, okay, this has a potential, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I love this question because, it's something we continuously ask ourselves. How can we make sure we're not missing things? It's very easy to write off a solution, you don't think works. And so I work with an incredible team of experts, PhDs, et cetera. And we actually, in our investment committee, despite coming from the consumer world, the healthcare world, more industrial world, we all sit together and poke holes at every single thing we look at. And so it takes a lot of time. There's no secret sauce, but it's finding a founder who understands what he's doing and then getting in the world and calling the folks who are seeing this. I was looking at a safety solution last week, and I won't share more on that because we're still diligencing it. I called 5 police stations.
Mm.
Hi, I'm a community member. Tell me how you evaluate new tech solutions, right? And look,
Mm.
I could tell you, I have a research analyst that sits at their screen and reviews reports, and that's helpful and everything. But I mean, why not go to the police chief, ask for 5 minutes at a time, say, hey, I have a solution that might help you. Tell me what it would take to get this into the market. And
Mm.
so, I really try to entrench myself in the problem that we're looking to solve before formulating an opinion on it. This takes a lot of time, and a lot of venture models aren't built around that. We are a low volume, high conviction fund, which means we will do about 10 investments a year. And for a full-time team that is, about 8, 9, almost 10 people around the table, we are spending a lot of time and taking a very deep look at everything we invest in. We don't do the flyer checks. We don't do that. We have organized our fund around the ability to spend the day driving up to police stations and understanding, what issues they face and what it would take to solve those.
That's really cool. Industrial transformation, as you said, when you explained it initially, I asked you that it might be abstract to somebody hearing for the first time. And I'm sure, every wave of industrial transformation change carries a narrative, right? Um, how do you, especially because now the AI is at the core of it in many ways, um, how do you frame today's transformation in a way that resonates not just with the founders and investors, but also policymakers, the community, and etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a fantastic question because if we take a step back and look at each and every wave of industrial change, there's always a narrative, something people rally around, what defines the winners and losers, which, you can often only see in hindsight. But part of my job is trying to figure it out. And so I think, the transformation we're seeing today is unique because it's both faster and more interconnected than anything we've ever experienced before. And you know, I love to believe that we're in an area defined by true integration. Finally, right? I mean, interestingly, I was listening to some operators speak, and they were talking about the internet boom versus what we're seeing now with AI. And with the internet boom, it took decades for network effects to happen, brand effects to start hitting, and to truly stick, and for the entire ecosystem to form. I mean, how is ChatGPT already hit brand effects? That is crazy for an industry. And, you know, I think that really speaks to being in an era of integration. And I think, similar forces are continuing to play out, but at a much faster pace. And, AI, advanced manufacturing, bioengineering, they're not just powerful individually, they gain exponentially when they interact. And, as I said, brand effects are emerging earlier, shaping adoption and trust before products even scale. I mean, I don't even know what OpenAI is going to come out with tomorrow. And, founders now face a very different problem than they did before. And again, it's not just building a great product, but orchestrating a great ecosystem and figuring out how to develop tech and distribute and integrate within the confines of the systems and the markets they're operating in, which again, haven't even fully formed for a lot of them.
You're right. I mean, the AI, some of the ARs I'm seeing these days, insane, like 100 million a year. I don't know, 30 million in this amount of time. Um, but how do you cut through the noise, the AI noise?
Yeah, it's hard. And, everyone likes to talk about the AI bubble as well. And, I go back and forth on if we're in an AI bubble. I was just at a fantastic JP Morgan conference yesterday, and, they have the strong belief that AI is not a bubble. I hear some people talk about if it is a bubble, but, regardless of if it is or is not, there is a lot of noise in this industry. And the way I really cut through it is the narrative I just described about integration and ecosystem orchestration, is what separates signal from noise. And as I said, when I speak to a founder, I'm not really interested in their AI infrastructure, at least in the first meeting. I'm interested in how they're using their technology to solve integration problems. And I really encourage, founders to record themselves and see how much time they're spending talking about the problem versus what they're building. And, for me, I really break it down into a few filters, one being customer pull versus technology push. How much are they thinking about where this technology is being drawn in and who's interested in adopting this technology? The signals when they can walk me through exactly how their AI eliminates friction in an existing process that people are already, paying to solve, but obviously not solve well. And, I understand that I invest in early stages, but I want to understand it and see a founder who can walk me through what a path. And look, most of the time they're wrong, but a path of getting their product into the hands of the people who need it most. And you know, I also, I know I'm very positive because I'm a venture capitalist, but I do look for founders who understand that AI is deflationary. It makes capabilities cheaper, more accessible, and, aren't asking themselves, what can I do with this AI solution? But, what becomes possible when AI enables something to cost 90% less? The most interesting companies aren't positioning themselves as AI doing X, Y, and Z. They're manufacturing, they're focused on logistics, they're healthcare companies at their core, and they use AI to unlock economies that were impossible before. They're automating tasks. Um, and then, I pay attention to adoption in these environments. I look to target, as I said, Mock itself is already integrated with 30 OEMs. That is no small feat. I want to see a conservative manufacturer, a hospital system, someone who's really difficult to integrate with, tell me that what they're looking at is fundamentally different. because these customers don't deploy technology for their novelty. They deploy because it works in their specific context.
Got it. One thing I'm curious about, though, you mentioned OpenAI, and the question came to my mind. Something I quite often end up thinking about is some of the companies right now. There's such a huge consolidation happening. They have so much brain power, financial power, as they're massive. They're constantly getting backing from this or that. Funds available, everything, right? Like, and they're also pushing into many different sectors. Like OpenAI is pushing into healthcare. Like you see this huge organization pushing into biotech and stuff. As a founder, as a startup founder, like how do you compete with them? You're a young person, let's say, or you're not a young person, you're just a person who wants to start a startup. Like, how do you find that solution where those companies are not either building or focusing on they can't build? How do you compete with them essentially?
Yeah, a great question. I would say understand your strengths and understand where you fit, because you do fit. I think a great example of this is actually healthcare. I spent time, as I said, at a big pharmaceutical company and got to see the ins and outs. And I know big pharma gets a bad rap for many of reasons, but what they are really good at is bringing these products to market. Once they're approved or right before approval, they have systems and they have infrastructure and they have capital. Like you said, these big companies are able to spin things out to the market so quickly. And what I believe and what I saw from being at that big pharmaceutical company to being at a healthcare incubator is what small companies are good at is innovating. And people hear this time and time again, but they're good at innovating because they can move quickly, they can live and understand the problem, and they can focus. They can focus on what's really important and what really exists out there. And I truly believe there will always be a place for both small and big companies. I believe our economy is designed around it. And I think we can point to so many industries who have proven time and time again that there is space for both people, but you have to focus on what you're good at.
One of the sectors you mentioned is healthcare, right? And healthcare is one of those sectors that's been seeing a lot of transformation, innovation with AI at its core. It's one of those legacy industries that's very hard to transform. There's a lot of old workflows still in place. And you have an interest in the space too. So I'm curious, what kind of opportunities and bottlenecks do you see in the space?
Yeah. I mean, I love healthcare and I think it fits right within our industrial transformation thesis, not because there's not a lot of capital or it's, what people call as unsexy, but because there is so much infrastructure built around this system. And, the scale's huge. 20% of US GDP. That's massive. you know, and what's at stake, isn't just innovation for its own sake. It's meaningful, it's high impact change that's similar to all the other industries I've talked about, require patience, domain expertise, and deep, deep trust with operators. I mean, I am sitting waiting for someone to come to me with that solution that board member came to me and said they're looking for, because it is so important, right? Like, how do we increase throughput and utilization at the hospital level? And say, like, I I have spent 3 years studying this problem. I have talked to every, and look, it doesn't mean you have to know every ins and outs, but it means that you've had to talk to the people who experience and live this problem. Like I'm waiting for someone to come up to me and say, like, I have talked to X, Y, Z, and here's what I heard, and here's the problem that they live every day, and here's what everyone else is missing. And here's the solution. Selling into a hospital isn't like selling a B2B SaaS product. You're navigating compliance, training, integration, workflow redesign, and then at the core of it, you're dealing with humans, and you're dealing with humans at their most vulnerable. And so these solutions are just so important. And so, again, focusing on these integration challenges and regulation and what is one of the most important sectors in our economy.
Got it. I'm going to do a bit of a switch up because I remember in one of our conversations you mentioned your interest in consumer technology and hardware. And I actually want to ask, how does your investment philosophy extend to that space?
Yeah, this is a little bit of a fun area for me. Personal obsession to the max. I mean, I spend a little bit too much time looking at consumer hardware just because of the phase we're in today. But the through line is the same, right? I'm interested in founders who understand how consumers and humans behave. I mean, to a psychology level, to a neurology level. I mean, I read way too many books on neurology and, dopamine and serotonin. But, I think in hardware, there's this weird assumption that came about where, more engagement equals more value. And, I think that was really driven by social media and what actually turned this business into, selling consumers, right? We're actually, when we're buying a phone, we're actually selling ourselves. And when we're going to the app store, when things are free, they're not really free. They're selling your time and your attention and what they hope will make you the consumer of their product. Um, but when I look at data and human attention, I see a very different opportunity and something that really excites me. I mean, average knowledge worker, and this was something McKinsey spent a lot of time looking at, spends, hours a day just processing information, emailing, scheduling, research, and McKinsey projects that AI will automate 60 to 70% of that cognitive work within just a decade. I mean, that's the same speed that I talked about before we did not see within the internet boom. And, that's not just efficiency gains, that's a fundamental difference in where human time and attention is becoming available. And so again, this shift from buying human time to freeing up human time. And here's what I think, a very hot take. I think what most of Silicon Valley is missing is when humans have more time internally, we don't want to spend it on screens. They want to spend it on things that matter. They want to spend it on relationships, creativity, meaningful work. And, most hardware is built around that assumption, the attention economy, optimizing for engagement, time on device, notifications clicked. And I think that made more sense when human attention was scarce, right? When we had less time in our day, when we were spending that 60, 70% of our time researching. But I think we're moving towards an abundance model where AI handles routine cognitive work and human attention, hopefully becomes available for higher value activities.
How does that's a very interesting thought, actually. I never really thought about it that way. How do you think that will express itself? That switch to abundancy, how it will express itself through consumer technologies, I guess. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, and if I knew, I'd be building, right?
Fair enough.
Uh,
Yeah.
but I would say, I think, the folks and Joni Ives has it right. We need to build technology around where AI is headed and, agentic AI. I think agentic AI in where we're applying it today maybe might be a little off, but agentic AI and where we're headed is so crucial. And, I think a lot of the tasks we spend time doing, is what agentic AI is going to take over. And, you know, pioneers, like I said, the company IO is building devices for this, a fundamental shift in how we interact with technology. And, the iPhone itself, I'll give an example, we put it in our pockets, right?
Mm.
And it's that attention every time. If I wanted to right now answer a text, I would have to stop our conversation. Or if I wanted to, figure out an answer to a question, I thought your question was so good, I wanted to get a stat, I would have to stop and look at my phone. And I think, I don't have glasses yet because I don't think we've figured out how to use agentic AI to solve that problem. Yeah, but hopefully we can find some way for glasses or some, some sort of a device to clear that divide between technology and humans. And, I think what we're going to see is we've been working for technology for so long. Like if I want to find something, I have this device, I got to figure out how I can use it to find information. I mean, I feel so bad for, people on the older side of things because they've had a really hard time learning, right? Like how we
Mm,
can use our phone. I think iPhone actually launched like a simple mode because
mm,
it became so challenging for us to find information. I mean, we're working for these phones. And so I think any world you can visualize where it starts to work for us. And, my phone should know I wake up at this time, at like 2 hours before my meetings. I mean, it has access to my calendar. It should know, on Mondays, my meetings start at 8 a.m. Wake Emily up at 6 a.m. And it should know, I like to be slowly woken up. Like, I snooze a few times and so maybe you need to set an alarm this way. And then it even has access to my sleep data, right? Like I'm wearing an Oura ring. Why can't it say, we'll wake you up X time or Y time? And so again, like, I wish there was a silver bullet and an answer for what this is going to look like. But
mm.
I know it's leveraging what we already have access to make technology easier and require less human attention and time. I will say, and I will caveat, I think social media sits into a different bucket. And I
Yeah.
encourage everyone to read about why that is, because it is truly changing our brain chemistry, which is scary. I have personally attempted, I'm 2 weeks out, so wish me luck. I have no social media. And
Mm.
so, because just understanding how that rewires our brain and why we're driven for attention. But I think, excluding social media, just true utility of technology is going to look very, very different.
Got it. Very interesting because you mentioned the Oura ring, and I was thinking about it, and I actually wrote like a small article on Substack about it, about that. VCs used to like shy away from. I mean, probably to a certain degree still do shy away from hardware stuff, because it's tough to see venture returns the way you see it in software startups, right? But Aura Ring has, I believe, 11 billion. The recently they raised like 875 million, and they have like an 11 billion valuation. Then there's Whoop. Then there is Nothing. Just became a unicorn in the UK. It's more like a kind of phones and etc. And they're leaning into this bold design, unique design stuff. Um, do you think that there's a sort of like a narrative around hardware you think is kind of outdated? And what do most investors get wrong about backing hardware companies?
I think it's in the name. I think it's hard,
Mm,
right? I think, we've lived during a time where if you can build a SaaS solution and build a unicorn, you know, we'll do that,
mm,
right? And that has left a lot of our economy underserved. That
mm,
has left a lot of these, high GDP industries. I mean, agriculture, our food industry behind, right? And so I think people are now starting to catch up to the opportunity that is leveraging hardware to solve some of the most challenging spaces. But again, I think it's challenging, and I think it takes a very specific type of founder to
mm,
really solve for that. But I will say something I love about the Aura Ring is, and again, I love my Aura Rings. I'll talk about it all day. The technology in here is not that complex.
mm,
It is, reading my heart rate and using lights to understand what sleep cycle I'm in. I mean, no, when the Aura Ring came out, no one said, they are pushing the boundaries of what we have available. I mean, I say compare, we have spaceships going up to space. This is not, this was not a feat of engineering, right? This was a feat of integration and understanding what consumers wanted and, how to get it in the hands of, the right people, which that was amazing the way they were able to do that. And, I hope someone one day does a case study on how they really made this device blow up. But I will tell you, the reason it blew up was likely not because, some engineer came around and built the coolest technology that can fit on a ring.
mm. I agree. I actually was thinking about it, and I thought to myself, I think the consumer hardware technologies, the ones that end up being successful, it's not just the hardware that you can just like buy and put in your drawer. It becomes your daily habit. One, it becomes sort of like a platform, like a mix of hardware with software. I mean, your Aura ring, it's not just the ring, it also has a data analytics that goes on your app, right? And then it also kind of builds a community around it, which, some of them even gain kind of like a cult-like following. And I feel like when you have those mix of those factors, it ends up leading to a successful consumer hardware company, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah, I think they nailed consumer,
Mm,
right? Right? They nailed consumer, and they took a very underserved area,
mm,
which was we're overloaded by software. You
mm.
know, what I'm really using is a software solution, but the hardware makes it so sticky, so
So,
interesting. I actually think it's so funny because there were a lot of companies that made sleeping softwares.
mm,
In the App Store, I encourage everyone to go look at what V1 of what the Oura Ring was, which was, uh, you would put your phone next to you, and the data wasn't too good, but it was giving you more insight into your sleep. Movement. I think it did it through audio. What time you woke up, etc., and sounds.
mm.
Um, and that had very low adoption. And so I think, as you're hinting to, that really shows the power of hardware if you can nail the adoption.
Yeah. This has been a very interesting episode. I'm having a lot of fun myself. One thing you mentioned about you look for specific type of founders building hardware. What qualities, what signals are they that you're looking for?
Yeah. I mean, founders who understand the problem, they understand, not how we capture more attention, you know, how, how I can use this really cool piece of technology to integrate, but how can I start grassroots with a problem and work backwards
Mhm.
and work backwards to solve that problem that exists through what we already have available technology wise. Again, I want someone who's lived it, someone who breathes it, someone who's obsessed with it, right? Like someone who can't stop talking about the problem and the industry they're solving. And they wake up early in the morning because they want to go to the next farmer and ask him what he thinks of drive having to hire people to drive the trailer and tractor every day. Um, someone just so obsessed, boots on the ground with their problem and just obsessed.
Mm. Fair enough. You already mentioned a few specific examples, but I want to ask it one more time in case you want to mention something else. Where do you see the biggest opportunities in this space? The hardware, maybe even consumer technologies that almost no one is talking about right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, because we're hearing a lot. We're hearing a lot more broadly in consumer agentic AI. I've obviously through my time with Mock become obsessed with how we can start to, you know, like make these industries run more efficiently. And autonomous technology, I think, is one of the clearest examples we're seeing where we can start to reduce our time spent on things we really don't want to spend time on. Um, and start to really focus on big picture areas, and things that excite us, and things that wake us up every morning that aren't reading my email inbox for 3 hours,
Mm,
right? I will give a plug, and this is an area I want to continue to get more educated on, but I'm in Chicago, and Chicago has started some amazing initiatives around quantum computing, and I think that's going to open up so many doors, for technology to be integrated within systems. And I think similarly, synthetic data more broadly, is a very exciting area. And again, ushering that shift over to more you know, more interesting solutions. But again, I can sit here and talk technology all day long. I think there's so much cool technology. What really gets me excited is integration. you know I could spend all day reading books around quantum, but I think actually Chicago's doing an awesome job of this, of talking to doctors, talking to people on the farms, talking to the people who experience these problems every day, and building technology around it.
very cool. I had a lovely episode so far with you, Emily. You've had very interesting thoughts and perspectives, and we're coming towards the end. So I'm going to ask more kind of macro and reflection based questions, and I want you to lead the episode yourself right now. It's going to be more open ended, so it's up to you how you want to take it, how you want to navigate it. First question would be, we talked a lot about many different things, but if you had to articulate your big picture investment thesis, right? What does it look like?
Yeah, I think this comes down to one simple principle, and I think if anyone wants to leave this episode with one thing, it's design for your customer's reality, not your technology's capabilities. This is the through line of everything I do. When I wake up and spend my time doing, whether it's industrial transformation, or consumer hardware, I think it's a simple thesis that feels to have gotten lost, you know, with what is, this world of VC now and in industrial sectors, which is what I spend almost all my time on. Founders need to understand what their consumers care about, the regulatory cycles, the procurement processes, the risk averse operators who don't care about how nuanced your AI solution is. They care if it makes their day to day easier, and if they can adopt it within the guardrails that exist within their industries. And again, success comes from founders who design around these realities, not against them. And the pattern's the same in consumer and any industry that is really big and legacy and hasn't really adopted technology. And success comes from technology that amplifies human capability, that's while reducing cognitive overhead, whether it's an industrial operator who can manage more complexity with the same mental effort, or a consumer who can stay focused on what matters most. They're using the available technology to really integrate within, like, purely what the consumer and the operator wants. And the biggest opportunities exist where this consumer customer first approach meets like large underserved markets.
Fair enough. I guess this is going to be more open ended, so just genuinely take it in whichever direction you want to take it. What final closing thoughts, perspectives, or advice would you have to people, founders, investors, or just prospective founders listening to our episode you would want to have, or maybe some closing thoughts on just everything else we talked about?
Yeah, I'm going to make it very simple because I'm a very chatty person. And you know put your boots on and get out there and live the problem and understand. And don't be an entrepreneur because you want to be an entrepreneur. Be an
Mhm.
entrepreneur because you have a problem to solve, and build around your problems. Build around your problems, obsess with your problems, live your problems.
Thank you so much, Emily. This was a lovely episode. Thank you for your time and for your wonderful insights.
Yeah, thank you. It was so great chatting with you.